The night did not announce its violence politely. It erupted. The metal door at the end of the narrow hallway shook under relentless blows, each impact reverberating through the small house like a gunshot. Paint flakes drifted down from the ceiling with every strike. Outside, police sirens overlapped in a chaotic chorus that wrapped the house in panic. Red and blue lights bled through the thin curtains, slicing the living room into frantic, pulsing shadows. On the stained carpet, a middle-aged man collapsed to his knees, his body folding in on itself as if trying to disappear. His sobs were loud and uncontrollable, the kind that came from a man who knew his world had already ended.
Ivy, you have to hide. They are here, the auditors, the police.
His voice cracked on every word. Tears streamed down his face and soaked into the collar of his wrinkled shirt. He clawed at the air toward his daughter as if he could physically push her out of danger. The banging on the door grew louder and more impatient. Every siren outside felt like a countdown, each wail another second stolen from whatever future he thought he still had. "Dad? What did you do? Why are the police here? You said the business was doing fine." Ivy stood frozen near the staircase, her fingers gripping the banister so tightly her knuckles burned white. Her heart hammered against her ribs, fast and shallow. Fear crawled up her spine, cold and invasive. This was supposed to be a normal night. Dinner leftovers still sat on the counter. Her father had laughed earlier and promised everything was under control. Now his eyes could not even meet hers.
I borrowed money from the wrong people. I took money from the company accounts. If he finds me, jail is the least of my worries.
The confession spilled out in fragments, heavy with dread. He rocked back and forth on his knees with his hands tangled in his hair. The word he hung in the air like a curse, undefined yet terrifying. The banging stopped abruptly. After a brief silence, the front door exploded inward with deliberate force. Expensive leather shoes stepped over the broken threshold, slow and unhurried. Each footstep was measured and dominant. The sirens outside seemed to fade, as if even they knew they were no longer the greatest threat in the room.
Stop crying, Henry. It is embarrassing.
The voice cut through the room like a blade drawn softly across skin. Calm, deep, and smooth, it commanded attention without volume. The man stood perfectly at ease amid the wreckage, tailored coat immaculate and posture relaxed. His presence bent the space around him, pulling fear inward like gravity. Henry's sobs shrank into terrified gasps. "Who are you?" Ivy's breath caught as the man turned his gaze toward her. His eyes were sharp and assessing, lingering for a fraction of a second too long. She felt stripped bare under that look, every instinct screaming at her to run even as her legs refused to move. The air felt thicker, harder to breathe, as though the room itself had decided to side with him.
I am the man who owns this house, the man who owns the car outside, and as of 5 minutes ago, the man who owns your father's life. I am Damon Wolfe.
As he spoke, he moved closer and ignored the broken man on the floor. Ownership rolled off his words with chilling ease, not arrogance, but certainty. This was a man accustomed to having the world rearrange itself around his decisions. The name settled into the room like a verdict.
Mr. Wolfe, please, give me a month. I will pay it back. Do not hurt my daughter.
Henry lunged forward on his knees, desperation overriding dignity. His hands pressed to the floor as if bowing before a king. His voice climbed into a shrill scream and cracked under the weight of terror. He placed himself between Damon and Ivy in a pathetic attempt at protection.
Hurt her? Henry, look at your ledger. You stole $3 million from my firm. According to the contract, I can seize all your assets. And looking at this place, she is the only asset of value you have left.
A cold laugh slipped from Damon, soft and almost amused. He stepped closer to Ivy until she could smell his cologne, clean and expensive. He tilted his head slightly near her hair without touching. The intimacy of the gesture was violating. Revulsion and fear tangled in Ivy's chest as the word asset echoed in her mind. I am not an asset. Get away from me. She stumbled backward, her heel catching on the edge of the rug as panic stole her balance. Her voice shook, but stayed loud and defiant. Her back hit the wall, solid and unforgiving, leaving her nowhere else to retreat. Her heart pounded painfully, every beat warning her that this man was danger.
You are right. You are not an asset. You are collateral. Pack your bags, Ivy. Your father goes to prison, or you come with me. Choose now.
Damon leaned in just enough for his words to brush her ear like a secret meant only for her. His voice dropped, intimate and lethal. The room seemed to shrink as time stretched thin. Every sound disappeared except Ivy's ragged breathing. The choice hung in the air, sharp and absolute, with no third option. The private elevator rose in near silence, its faint mechanical hum vibrating through the soles of Ivy's worn shoes. It was not the noisy, rattling ascent she knew from old apartment buildings, but something smoother and heavier, as if the machine itself was padded in money. The walls were brushed steel, seamless and reflective, throwing back distorted images of her tense posture and Damon's relaxed dominance. With every passing second, the numbers climbed, and so did the pressure in her chest, the unspoken knowledge that each floor carried her farther away from the life she understood and closer to something she could not yet name. When the elevator finally stopped, the soft electronic chime sounded almost polite, mocking in its civility. The doors slid open with a whisper, revealing a space that felt less like a home and more like a curated exhibition of power. The air itself seemed colder, conditioned to perfection, stripping warmth from skin and breath alike. Before Ivy could take a step, the sheer scale of the penthouse pressed down on her senses, a silent announcement that this place existed beyond the rules of ordinary living. Her footsteps echoed as she followed Damon out onto the marble floor, the sound sharp and unforgiving. Each step bounced back at her, multiplied, as though the space were listening and recording her presence. The marble was pale, veined with dark lines like fractures frozen in stone, stretching endlessly beneath ceilings that soared far above her head. The emptiness amplified everything. The click of her shoes, the faint rustle of fabric, even her breathing, which she struggled to keep steady.
Welcome home. Or should I say, welcome to your prison.
Ivy's gaze swept across the penthouse, her eyes darting from towering windows to minimalist furniture arranged with surgical precision. There were no soft edges and no signs of comfort, only sharp angles, glass, steel, and monochrome surfaces that reflected light without absorbing warmth. Fear curled in her stomach, but awe threaded through it, unwanted and undeniable. This was luxury on a scale she had only seen in magazines, yet it felt hostile, like a beautifully designed cage built to remind its occupant of how small she was. It's cold. Everything is gray and black. Where am I sleeping? The dungeon? Damon moved with unhurried confidence toward a sleek bar that seemed to rise seamlessly from the wall. He selected a crystal tumbler, his movements practiced, as though this ritual grounded him. When he poured the amber liquid, the ice chimed softly, a delicate sound that contrasted cruelly with the tension in the room. Ivy watched his reflection ripple in the polished surfaces, noting how perfectly he fit into this environment, as if the penthouse had been designed around him.
Do not be dramatic. It does not suit you. You will sleep in the master suite. I sleep in the east wing. I value my privacy. If you cross into my wing without permission, I will add another month to your debt.
The words settled heavily between them, each sentence another invisible bar sliding into place. Ivy imagined the layout of the penthouse, entire wings separating spaces not for comfort, but for control. The idea that one wrong step, one moment of curiosity or desperation, could extend her sentence made her stomach knot. Privacy, in his mouth, sounded less like a preference and more like a weapon. How long? How long do I have to stay here until the debt is paid? Damon set the glass aside and approached her, closing the distance with deliberate slowness. He was taller and broader, his presence blotting out the light as he stopped directly in front of her. Ivy felt herself instinctively stiffen, her body reacting before her mind could catch up. The air between them grew thick and charged, and she became acutely aware of the imbalance, not just in size, but in power, wealth, and the certainty with which he occupied space.
$3 million? At your current waitress salary, about 150 years. But I'm a generous man. Be my assistant, my housekeeper, my companion at events. Do exactly what I say, when I say it. And maybe I will let you go in a year.
When he lifted his hand and tilted her chin with a single finger, the gesture was both intimate and dehumanizing. Ivy's heart slammed against her ribs as her forced gaze met his, searching for some sign of irony, mercy, or exaggeration. She found none. The offer was presented as kindness, yet it rang like a sentence, each role he listed stripping away another layer of autonomy. A year sounded merciful compared to a lifetime, but it was still a year owned entirely by him. And if I run? The corner of Damon's mouth curved upward as a low, dark chuckle escaped him. It reverberated in the vast space, as if the penthouse itself shared in his laughter. Ivy felt a chill crawl up her spine, the sound confirming what she already feared, that he had anticipated this question long before she ever asked it.
Run where, little mouse? I own the bank that holds your student loans. I own the building where your best friend lives. You can run, but you will only run into me. Now go wash that cheap perfume off. I have a dinner meeting. You are coming with me.
The finality of his words slammed into Ivy harder than any threat. The world she thought she could escape into suddenly collapsed, every familiar refuge already bearing his name. Even her scent, something personal and chosen, was deemed unacceptable here. As he turned away, already dismissing her, the penthouse seemed to close in, its luxury transforming fully into confinement. Ivy stood alone on the cold marble, understanding at last that this was not just a place she would stay, but a cage designed to remind her every moment who held the key. The room held its breath. The closet door stood open like a confession, releasing the faint scent of fabric and perfume into the air. Light slid across hangers and folded silk, catching on colors that promised different versions of the same woman. Somewhere beneath it all, a zipper whispered and fabric shifted, sounds that felt louder than they should have been. Damon sat in the chair with stillness that was deliberate, his attention fixed and unblinking as Ivy stepped forward from the closet, every movement measured under his gaze.
No, take it off.
The refusal landed with weight. Damon did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His posture remained relaxed, one arm draped over the chair, yet the authority in his tone cut through the space with surgical precision. Ivy could feel the judgment before she fully processed the words, as if the dress itself had failed an unspoken test. The quiet that followed was not empty. It pressed in, demanding compliance. That is the third dress. What is wrong with it? Frustration cracked through Ivy's composure. Her fingers clenched the fabric at her sides, knuckles whitening as she stood her ground for a heartbeat longer than she should have. The mirror nearby reflected more than her image. It caught the tension in her shoulders and the flare of defiance in her eyes. She was acutely aware of being watched and measured. Every flaw and virtue weighed without mercy.
It is too revealing. I want to show you off, not sell you. There is a difference. Wear the red one. The silk.
His words were calm, almost instructional, as though he were explaining a principle rather than issuing a command. The distinction he drew was deliberate, loaded with ownership and intent. The red dress waited in the closet, silk catching the light like a held breath. It was not merely clothing. It was a decision already made for her, a role selected and enforced with quiet certainty. It is too tight. I can barely breathe in it. The complaint came with a hint of vulnerability she had not intended to reveal. Ivy shifted her weight, imagining the constriction, the way silk would cling and dictate the shape of her body. Tight meant exposed in a different way, controlled and contained, unmistakably deliberate. Even as she protested, part of her knew the argument was already lost.
Good, if you cannot breathe, you cannot talk back. Turn around, let me zip it.
Damon rose from the chair with unhurried confidence, each step toward her slow and intentional. The space between them collapsed as he moved behind her, his presence radiating before contact was ever made. His hands hovered at her waist in a pause that felt like restraint before gripping firmly and possessively. When she turned as instructed, the air shifted. The zipper slid downward and then up again in a measured drag, the sound intimate and inescapable. His breathing was close to her neck, warm and steady, a reminder that she was not alone and not in control. "Your hands are cold." A shiver betrayed her, traveling from the point of contact through her spine. The contrast was sharp, his cool fingers against her heated skin, silk trapping warmth beneath it. The mirror reflected them together now, her body framed by his, the image sealing the imbalance of power more clearly than words ever could.
And you are burning up. Nervous, Ivy?
He leaned closer, his whisper threading into her ear with deliberate intimacy. The question was not concern, it was observation, even satisfaction. Her pulse betrayed her long before she could form an answer, each beat echoing the awareness that he could feel everything, every tremor and hesitation. "I hate you." The words were sharp, but they lacked the force she intended. Hatred here was tangled with heat and resistance, an emotion that kept her engaged and reacting. She stared at her reflection, searching for herself beneath the red silk and his shadow, wondering how much of this moment was defiance and how much was surrender.
Hate is passion. I can work with hate. Indifference is what I cannot stand. Now put on the heels, we are leaving.
His lips brushed the air beside her ear, close enough to promise and distant enough to deny. The instruction followed immediately, seamless and final. The heels waited on the floor like punctuation at the end of a sentence. The night beyond the door called, and with it, whatever version of herself he intended to present to the world. There was no question of whether she would comply, only how it would feel when she did. The restaurant breathed opulence from every polished surface. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across white tablecloths, turning silverware into small constellations. A grand piano murmured in the background, its notes smooth and unhurried, threading through the low hum of wealthy conversations. Forks chimed softly against porcelain. Glasses clinked in restrained celebration, and the air carried the layered scents of truffle oil, seared steak, and expensive wine. It was the kind of place where money insulated everything, where impropriety was usually hidden behind manners and silk-lined smiles. At the center of it all, Damon sat composed and immaculately dressed, posture relaxed but alert, the kind of stillness that suggested control rather than ease. Across from him, Mr. Sterling leaned too far back in his chair, his gaze roaming with the confidence of a man accustomed to taking what he wanted. Ivy sat beside Damon, acutely aware of every glance and every pause in conversation, feeling herself out of place among the cut crystal and whispered power plays.
So Damon, this is the new assistant? Very fresh.
Sterling turned his attention to Ivy with a familiar, predatory ease, his confidence resting on the assumption that his status excused anything he said.
What's your name, sweetheart? Can you get me more wine? And maybe drop a napkin so I can see you bend over?
The words slid across the table like oil, slick and unmistakably foul. Sterling's tone carried an easy arrogance, a practiced sleaze that assumed consent through status alone. Ivy felt heat rush to her face, a sharp, disbelieving sting that crawled up her spine. Around them, the restaurant continued its elegant rhythm, oblivious, the piano still playing as if nothing had been disturbed. "Excuse me?" Her gasp broke through the moment, small but sharp. It was not just offense, it was shock, the kind that freezes your breath for a heartbeat too long. Ivy's mind raced, caught between instinctive anger and the fear of causing a scene in a place where she felt she had no real standing. Then, the world shifted. The piano faltered, its melody thinning as if the pianist sensed the change in the air. Damon's hand moved with deliberate precision, lifting his wine glass and setting it down with controlled force that rang louder than any shout. The sound cut cleanly through the dining room, a line drawn in silence.
Sterling, did you just ask my companion to bend over?
Damon's voice was calm, too calm. It carried a deadly restraint, each word measured and stripped of warmth. He did not raise his voice or lean forward. He simply looked at Sterling, and in that gaze was the quiet promise of consequences. Nearby diners began to sense something was wrong, glancing over their glasses before quickly pretending not to notice.
Relax, Wolf. She's just an employee, right? A debt repayment? I'll give you $50,000 to borrow her for the night.
Sterling laughed softly as he spoke, as if reducing a human being to a transaction were a clever joke. Ivy felt her stomach twist, the word repayment echoing cruelly in her mind. She did not look at Damon, afraid of what she might see or not see in his reaction. The scrape of Damon's chair against the floor shattered any remaining illusion of civility. The sound was harsh and violent in its suddenness. In the same breath, a heavy thud followed as Damon crossed the distance and seized Sterling by the collar, lifting him just enough for panic to flash across the man's face. Conversations died outright, and the restaurant held its breath.
Look at me. She is not for sale. She is not a repayment. She is under my protection. If you look at her again, if you even think about her, I will buy your company tomorrow morning and fire you by noon. Do you understand?
Each sentence landed like a blow, slow and deliberate. Damon's grip was unyielding, his expression carved from ice. This was not bluster or posturing, it was certainty. Power radiated from him, not loud, but absolute, the kind that made threats feel like simple statements of fact.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Sterling's voice cracked as he forced out the apology, bravado evaporating under the weight of Damon's stare. When Damon finally released him, Sterling stumbled back and straightened his jacket with shaking hands, humiliation burning across his face.
Get out.
Damon turned to Ivy, and the change in him was immediate, the fury draining away and leaving only concern.
Are you okay?
Damon adjusted his suit jacket with meticulous calm, as though he had not just dismantled a man's sense of superiority in front of an audience. Then he turned fully to Ivy, and the concern on his face was so genuine, it left her momentarily unmoored. "You just lost $1 million contract for me." "Why? I thought I was just collateral." The words spilled out before Ivy could stop them, disbelief tangling with something dangerously close to emotion. Her world had taught her that protection always came with a price, that people like Damon did not intervene without calculation.
Collateral is valuable, Ivy. You do not let anyone scratch the paint on a Ferrari, and you are worth more than this entire restaurant. Let's go. I lost my appetite.
Damon took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles in a grounding, reassuring motion. The gesture was intimate, without being possessive, steadying in a way Ivy had not known she needed. As they walked out together, the restaurant slowly exhaled and the piano resumed its song. But for Ivy, nothing sounded the same anymore. Night wrapped the penthouse in a suffocating grip. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the storm raged without mercy, thunder cracking as if the sky itself were splitting open. Rain lashed against the glass in furious sheets, each drop echoing through the vast modern space like a warning. The city below blurred into trembling lights, swallowed by darkness and water. Inside, the air felt charged and heavy with unspoken tension, as if the storm had crept indoors and taken residence within the walls. In the master bedroom, the calm luxury of wealth was shattered. Silk sheets lay twisted, pillows displaced, and the bed became a battleground between memory and fear. Ivy thrashed beneath the covers, slick with cold sweat, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. The nightmare dragged her backward through time, forcing her to relive the moment her world collapsed. No, Dad, do not leave me. Her scream tore through the room, raw and broken, cutting through the thunder like glass. It carried a child's terror escaping an adult's throat as her fingers clawed at the sheets and shadows from the storm danced across the walls. The bedroom door flew open and slammed against the wall. Heavy footsteps pounded across the marble floor as Damon Wolfe rushed to the bed, alarm overriding his usual control.
Ivy, wake up.
She jolted upright, tears streaming as she dragged in air like a drowning victim. Her eyes remained unfocused, caught between a prison hallway and the darkened bedroom. They took him. The police took him. I was all alone. Damon sat on the edge of the bed and leaned closer, his presence solid and anchoring. The distance he usually maintained vanished, replaced by something dangerously human.
You are not alone. You are here with me. The doors are locked. The security system is on. No one gets in without my permission.
His controlled voice tried to build a wall between her and the fear. Ivy shook her head as tears fell onto the sheets, and the fear refused to loosen its grip. I am scared, Damon. I have nothing. I am nobody. Damon hesitated before wrapping his arms around her and pulling her close. Ivy stiffened, then collapsed against him, her sobs muffled against his shoulder.
You are not nobody. You are the only person who dares to yell at Damon Wolfe. Stop crying. It ruins your pretty face.
His fingers moved through her hair in an awkward but gentle attempt at comfort. Ivy's breathing slowed as she clung to him, afraid the nightmare would return if she let go. Can you stay just until the storm passes? The request lingered between them. Damon exhaled deeply, jaw tightening as he fought an internal battle between rules and desire.
That is against the rules, Ivy. I am a man. You are wearing a thin nightgown. I am not a saint.
Ivy lifted her head to meet his gaze as thunder shook the windows, daring them to cross the unspoken line. I do not want a saint. I want the wolf, please. A low groan escaped Damon as he finally surrendered to the moment and shifted on the bed.
Move over. If you touch me, I cannot promise I will be a gentleman.
Morning settled into the kitchen with a quiet insistence, creeping in through pale light and routine sounds rather than announcements. The refrigerator hummed steadily as a mug was set down with a soft clink and a kettle cooled with a faint hiss. The air smelled of coffee and toast. Ordinary comforts that contrasted with the unspoken tension between them. This was not a gentle morning. It was shaped by habits, power, and the unbalanced weight of care disguised as control.
I noticed something yesterday. Your winter coat has a hole in the pocket and your boots are leaking.
Damon's voice cut through the domestic quiet with a deliberate calm, as if he had been cataloging details for some time. His attention lingered on small, practical failures most people would overlook. These observations were proof of vigilance and ownership, expressed through noticing what Ivy had learned to ignore. I cannot afford new ones. You know that? You take all my salary for the debt. Ivy's response carried resignation edged with defensiveness. She stood with her arms close to her body, shoulders hunched from long practice. Money passed through her hands without ever belonging to her, and saying it aloud felt less like an argument than stating a law of nature. Damon reached into his pocket and slid a heavy black metal card across the counter. The soft scrape drew the eye as it came to rest between them like a challenge, carrying both access and obligation.
Take this.
Another loan? No thanks. Suspicion flared in Ivy's expression as her gaze flicked between the card and Damon. Her refusal was instinctive, a small act of self-preservation, even as she knew what the card could solve. Damon straightened, his posture sharpening as patience narrowed into authority. His eyes fixed on her, signaling that this was not a suggestion, but an instruction.
Not a loan, an allowance. I want you to buy a coat, boots, skincare, whatever girls buy. If you get sick, you cannot work. If you look poor, it reflects badly on me.
The word allowance reframed everything, recasting her needs and autonomy as assets under his management. Care and control braided together until they were indistinguishable. Is that all you care about, your image? The question slipped out edged with hurt. Challenging him carried risk, but swallowing the bitterness felt worse. Damon moved closer until Ivy's back met the counter. His presence loomed, inescapable, commanding the space around her.
I care about you not freezing to death, but if it makes you feel better to think I am a heartless monster, go ahead. Just buy the coat. And Ivy?
Yes, her answer came quieter, senses sharpened by proximity. Being addressed by name felt like a hook drawing her full attention. A knowing smirk curved Damon's mouth, balanced between amusement and judgment.
Buy some lingerie, too. The stuff you wear is tragic.
Heat rushed to Ivy's face as embarrassment bloomed. The comment exposed a vulnerability she had never meant to share. How do you know what I wear? The question burst out, half accusation and half panic, as her sense of boundaries blurred under his steady gaze.
I do the laundry, remember? I fired the maid because she was stealing. I have seen everything. Now go, spend my money. It annoys me when it just sits in the bank.
The explanation was delivered with casual certainty, reframing indulgence as duty. Ivy understood the full shape of his control as the card lay silent and expectant on the counter. The office party pulsed with a carefully manufactured sense of celebration, the kind that came from expensive lighting, polished marble floors, and champagne that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Conversations overlapped in smooth, rehearsed laughter, voices rising and falling like a controlled tide. Glasses clinked, heels clicked, and beneath the music hummed the quiet electricity of ambition. This was not a party meant for joy. It was a battlefield disguised as luxury, where power shifted hands with a smile and reputations were built or shattered in a single exchange. Through the layered murmur of conversation, one voice sliced sharply through the air with polished cruelty. Veronica stood perfectly composed, her posture flawless, and her smile thin and deliberate. Her gaze locked onto Ivy with the precision of a predator identifying weakness, her confidence rooted in the assumption that she belonged here more than anyone else ever could. So, you're the new assistant. Damon usually prefers experienced women, not children. How long do you think you'll last? A month. Ivy felt the weight of the room tilt toward her, as if every glittering surface reflected her vulnerability back at her. She stood still, with her hands lightly clasped, her heart pounding louder than the music. This world was still new to her, full of sharp edges and unspoken rules, and Veronica's words pressed against her like a test she had not studied for. Still, she lifted her chin, clinging to the quiet strength that had brought her this far. I am just working here. Veronica's smile widened without warmth. She reached into her clutch with exaggerated ease and drew out crisp bills as if they were scraps of paper. The practiced gesture was humiliating in its simplicity, a silent announcement of hierarchy. Around them, conversations continued, either oblivious or deliberately ignoring the tension. Honey, we all know what working means. Here is $500. Go get me a coffee and take your time. Before Ivy could react, the atmosphere shifted. A heavy presence moved in behind them, and Damon's voice emerged low and controlled with restrained fury. The surrounding chatter dimmed instinctively, as if the room itself recognized danger.
Veronica, put your money away.
Veronica turned instantly, surprise flashing across her face before practiced charm took its place. She laughed lightly and stepped closer to Damon as though nothing inappropriate had occurred, her hand hovering as if she might touch him. An invisible line had been crossed. "So, Damon, darling, I was just training your intern." Damon did not smile. He stepped toward Ivy with deliberate authority and slid his arm around her waist in a decisive public declaration. The gesture sent a clear message through the room.
She is not an intern. She does not fetch coffee for anyone but me. In fact, she has more authority in this company than you do.
The words landed like a slap. Veronica's confidence faltered as disbelief crossed her face and nearby conversation stilled. "What? That is ridiculous." Damon tilted his head with faint amusement while his eyes remained cold. He turned to Ivy and gave her the floor, transforming the moment into a public execution of authority.
Is it? Ivy, do you like Veronica's contract with us?
Heat replaced the chill in Ivy's chest as she realized she was not powerless. Damon's question was an invitation, and she accepted it, straightening her shoulders as her voice found strength. "Not really. She is rude." That was all it took. Damon turned back to Veronica, with his decision made and his authority absolute.
You heard the lady. Your contract is terminated. Security will escort you out.
Veronica stood frozen as humiliation flooded her face and security approached. Whispers rippled through the room as the queen fell before the court. "Did you just fire her for me?" Damon leaned closer and lowered his voice so only Ivy could hear. The noise of the party returned, but the space between them felt charged and intimate.
I would burn this whole building down for you. Firing a consultant is easy.
The room breathed with the intimate chaos of departure. Fabric rasped against metal as the suitcase zipper crawled shut, tooth by tooth, sealing fragments of a life that had been unfolded here. Footsteps crossed the polished floor with deliberate restraint, each step measured and cautious, as if the air itself might shatter. The walls held their breath, bearing witness to the quiet violence of leaving, the kind that makes no sound until it is already too late.
What are you doing?
Damon entered without ceremony, the echo of his shoes announcing him before his voice did. He stopped short, the sight arresting him, the suitcase by the door and the finality of it unmistakable. His presence shifted the temperature of the room, tension tightening like a drawn wire. He searched her face for a crack or a pause, anything that would tell him this was a misunderstanding. "My dad called. His lawyer found a loophole. The debt is void. I am free, Damon. I am leaving." The words landed one by one, each syllable carving a deeper hollow in the space between them. Freedom, spoken aloud, seemed to rearrange the furniture and tilt the world on its axis. Ivy stood straighter as she spoke, as though the sentence itself had lifted weight from her shoulders. The suitcase waited like a faithful witness, mute but decisive.
Free? Is that what you think this was? Just a prison?
Silence followed, vast and consuming. It pressed against Damon's ears until it rang, louder than any shout. In that pause, memories flickered, nights of shared quiet and mornings heavy with unspoken bargains. The word prison echoed back at him, distorted and unrecognizable, as if it had been torn from a language he thought they shared. "Wasn't it? You blackmailed me. You forced me here. Now I can go back to my life." Her gaze did not waver. Each accusation was delivered with a steadiness earned through endurance, not anger. The room seemed to narrow, corners creeping closer as if to test the truth of her claim. Going back carried the promise of warmth, of choice, of a self that existed before him.
What life? Serving coffee to perverts? Freezing in a cheap apartment? I gave you a kingdom, Ivy.
His composure fractured as he spoke, his voice thinning and splintering under the weight of fear he refused to name. Images he had curated of luxury, protection, and excess rose like monuments he expected her to admire. The kingdom he offered loomed grand in his mind. Yet now it cast a long, cold shadow, revealing the bars hidden beneath the gold. "You gave me a cage, A golden one, but still a cage. You never asked me to stay. You just told me to stay. Goodbye, Damon. The word goodbye settled with devastating calm. Ivy reached for the handle, fingers steady, heart pounding with the terror and relief of choice. The door opened, and with it, the corridor beyond. Anonymous, indifferent, and free. The door slammed, a sharp report ricocheting through the apartment. Moments later, the elevator chimed, a small and impersonal bell marking her departure. Then nothing. She was gone. What followed was raw and uncontained. Damon's roar tore from his chest, an animal sound of loss and disbelief. His arm swept across the desk, sending objects into flight as glass exploded against walls and fragments skittered across the floor. The kingdom lay in ruins at his feet, reflecting back a truth he could no longer deny. Without her, it was only an empty throne. The rain was not a gentle curtain, but a relentless force, pouring from the sky as if the city itself were trying to wash away every mistake ever made on its streets. Water pooled along the cracked asphalt, reflecting distorted streetlights that flickered like uncertain witnesses. Ivy moved through it all, with a suitcase dragging behind her, its wheels splashing through puddles, each step heavy and uneven. Her shoulders shook as she cried, breath catching in her chest, tears indistinguishable from the rain that soaked her hair, her coat, her resolve. Every step away from him felt like survival and like amputation. The night shattered with violence as a car screeched to a halt behind her. Tires screamed against wet pavement, the sound slicing through the rain. A door flew open with reckless urgency, slamming against its frame. The engine idled like a restless beast, heat and steam rising into the cold air. In that instant, fate seemed to skid sideways, refusing to let this moment pass quietly.
Ivy, stop.
Damon ran after her, shoes slipping slightly on the slick ground, lungs burning as rain filled his mouth with every breath. His tailored coat was already ruined, clinging to him, heavy with water, but he did not slow. The distance between them felt unbearable, as if every footstep was a second too late. "Go away. I do not owe you anything anymore." She turned just enough to shout, her voice raw and stripped of politeness and restraint. Years of swallowed words came out sharp and desperate, thrown like shields between them.
You owe me a chance. Damn it, Ivy, stop fighting me for 1 second.
He reached her then, fingers closing around her arm, the contact electric. With a sudden, unthinking pull, he spun her around to face him. Rain plastered his hair across his forehead, his jaw tight with frustration and fear, eyes blazing with something dangerously close to loss. "Why? Give me one reason why I should get back in that car." Her question cut through the storm. She stood there shaking, suitcase abandoned at her side, daring him to answer with something more than control and more than habit. The rain traced lines down her face, but her eyes were clear and demanding truth.
Because I cannot sleep without you. Because my house is too quiet. Because I look at my bank account and I hate every dollar because I cannot spend it on you.
The words burst out of him, unpolished and painfully honest. Each confession stripped away another layer of the man who hid behind power and wealth. In the rain, surrounded by noise and chaos, he sounded naked, like someone finally admitting that all his riches had never taught him how to be alone. "That is your reason?" She stared at him, stunned, as if recalibrating everything she thought she knew. Her anger faltered, confusion and disbelief flickering across her face.
No, my reason is that I love you. I fell in love with the collateral. I broke my own rule. Please do not make me beg. I am not good at it. But for you, I will kneel right here in this mud.
The rain soaked him completely now. His suit darkened, hair falling into his eyes. His voice softened on the last words, pride dissolving into something fragile. Slowly and deliberately, he lowered himself, knees hitting the wet ground with a splash, water and mud staining fabric, that once symbolized control. Damon, get up. You are ruining your suit. Her protest was half panic and half disbelief. Even now, part of her clung to the absurdity of it. This powerful man kneeling in the rain for her.
Marry me. Not a fake marriage. Not a contract. Real. Be my wife. Be the owner of everything I have. Just come home.
He looked up at her, rain streaming down his face like tears he refused to name. In his eyes was no calculation and no negotiation, only surrender. The city seemed to hold its breath. You are crazy. You are a controlling, arrogant maniac. Her laugh broke through her sobs. The sound cracked, but warm, like light through storm clouds.
I know. Is that a yes?
Yes, get up, you old wolf. Take me home. Relief crashed over him harder than the rain. He rose, pulling her into his arms, kissing her deeply as if to anchor the moment into reality. The storm softened, rain blending into warmth, into music, into the promise of something rebuilt. I spent my life acquiring assets, companies, real estate, and gold. But in the end, the only thing that ever mattered was her.